Doctrine and Covenants 101 is the Lord's response to the prophet Joseph Smith's inquiry regarding the November 1833 expulsion of church members from their homes and land in Jackson County, Missouri. Here's the backstory. Tensions between church members and the Jackson County locals existed almost from the time church members first began settling there in the late summer of 1831. In fact, even before their arrival, the Lord told a group of church members in Ohio that the land of Missouri was both the future land of your inheritance and also the current land of your enemies, an early indicator of potential conflict. Public threats and intimidation in Jackson County began in the spring of 1832. First, by handwritten bills posted up in various places, warning church members to leave the county. Then by verbal warnings and threats to church leaders, and finally by throwing stones and bricks at their homes and breaking their windows several nights in a row. Then it subsided. Then that fall of 1832, hostilities and intimidation briefly intensified as gunshots were fired into the homes of some church members. That September in D&C 84, the Lord told Missouri church members that they needed to repent of some specific things. Otherwise, he warned, there remaineth a scourge and judgment to be poured out upon the children of Zion. Then, during the winter and spring of 1833, due to the circulation of all manner of false stories against them, hatred toward the saints festered and intensified, and a mob spirit secretly spread wider and wider. In March of 1833, the Lord told Joseph Smith in D&C 90 that although your brethren in Zion begin to repent, nevertheless I am not well pleased with many things, including that William McClellan, Sidney Gilbert, Edward Partridge, and others have many things to repent of, adding that I, the Lord, will contend with Zion and plead with her strong ones and chasten her until she overcomes and is clean before me. Months later, that summer, the verbal threats, house stonings, and window breakings began again. And then on July 15th, a declaration signed by some 300 of the Jackson County locals was issued and circulated in the county, wherein they declared their intentions to rid their society of the Mormons, peaceably if we can, forcibly if we must. And therein they finally stated precisely why they hated church members so much that they wanted to eject them from their society. To summarize their reasons, they stated that the Mormons were poor, lazy, deluded religious fanatics or knowing deceivers who pretended to revelation, healing the sick, speaking in tongues, and performing miracles such as was done by the apostles in ancient times, all of which was blasphemous and openly derogatory of God and religion. Also, the Mormons bombastically claimed that their God hath given them this county of land, and that sooner or later they must and will have possession of our lands for an inheritance. And third, their biggest complaint of all centered on their fears of the effect the Mormons would have on their slaves. Keep in mind that Missouri was at this time a slave state. They accused them of tampering with our slaves to sow dissensions and to raise seditions amongst them. They accused W. Phelps of using his newspaper to implicitly invite free Negroes and mulattoes from other states to become Mormons and remove and settle among us. This they feared would be one of the surest means of driving us from the county, since it would corrupt our blacks and instigate them to bloodshed. It would also require them, the white locals, to receive into the bosom of our families, as fit companions for our wives and daughters, the degraded free Negroes and mulattoes who are now invited to settle among us. Under such a state of things, they declared, even our beautiful county would cease to be a desirable residence, and our situation intolerable. In a follow-up resolution written days later on July 20th, they mentioned each of these points again and added that Mormons posed a political threat as well, saying that since they intend to continue to gather to Jackson County, it would only be a matter of time until the civil government of the county will be in their hands, when the sheriff, the justices, and the county judges will be Mormons. Hence, in the name of self-preservation, they concluded that this community of Mormons, now only 1,200 strong, needed to be blasted in the germ before it could grow any larger in Jackson County. And if they refused to leave us in peace as they found us, they threatened, we agree to use such means as may be sufficient to remove them. Each of these accusations, by the way, were eventually either denied or refuted by Missouri church leaders. But on July 20th, a delegate of 13 locals met with 6 church leaders and demanded that W. Phelps Printing Office, Sidney Gilbert's store, and all other shops be closed, and for the Mormons to leave the county immediately. Church leaders asked for 3 months to consider their demand, which was refused. They then asked for 10 days, to which the mob leaders responded that 15 minutes was the most that could be granted. Given such short notice, each church leader responded that he could not consent to these demands. So, shortly thereafter, a mob of several hundred stormed Phelps' print shop, which was a 2-story brick building with the print shop on the second floor and his family home on the first floor. The mob hurled the press from the upper floor, destroying it, and scattered all the paper and type throughout the streets, while Phelps' wife and children were forcefully thrust out of their home on the first floor and their furniture thrown out behind them in broken pieces. And finally, the building itself was destroyed. The mob then proceeded swiftly to Sidney Gilbert's store and began to do the same, at which point Sidney quickly interceded and agreed to pack up his goods and close his store, thus temporarily turning away the wrath of the mob. They then went in pursuit of people to punish. This is when Bishop Edward Partridge was taken from his house by this mob and, along with church member Charles Allen, marched to the public square, where they were publicly tarred and feathered before a taunting crowd. 3 days later, on July 23rd, a mob of 500, armed and waving red flags, rode into town threatening death and destruction to the Mormons. Seeing the mob's determination, these 6 church leaders, to their credit, courageously offered to sacrifice their lives to the mob if that would satisfy them and turn away their wrath from the rest of the saints and let them stay in the land and live there in peace. The mob refused their offer, saying that everyone should die for themselves or leave the county. So church leaders instead signed an agreement on this day that half of the saints would leave Jackson County by January 1st, 1834, and the other half by April 1st. Thus hoping to buy themselves enough time to consult with Ohio church leaders and to seek legal help from the Missouri governor. Oliver Cowdery was sent shortly thereafter to Ohio to consult with church leaders, arriving on August 9th. Meanwhile, a week earlier, on the 2nd of August 1833, Joseph received Section 97, wherein the Lord warned that if Zion observe not to do whatsoever I have commanded her, I will visit her according to all her works with sore affliction, including with sword, with vengeance, and with devouring fire. 4 days later, Joseph received Section 98, which contained counsel intensely relevant to both the situation of the Missouri saints and that of the saints in Kirtland, who had recently begun to experience severe persecution as well. Herein the Lord counseled church members to be temperate in their reactions to violence, to follow constitutional law, and to renounce war and proclaim peace, offering forgiveness to wrongdoers. Yet he also explained the conditions under which self-defense was justified in his eyes. On August 18th, after learning from Oliver Cowdery more of the particulars of what was happening there, Joseph wrote a letter to church leaders in Missouri, declaring that it is the will of the Lord that not 1 foot of land should be given to the enemies of God or sold to them. They were to hold their ground. Shortly thereafter, Orson Hyde was sent from Ohio to Missouri, where he and W. W. Phelps carried a petition from the afflicted saints to Missouri Governor Daniel Dunklin to solicit his protection and help in obtaining damages for their loss of property and personal abuse. They also requested Dunklin to raise troops to help them sue for redress and perhaps even to help prosecute the perpetrators of anti-Mormon violence for treason against the government. Governor Dunklin said he was willing to help them, but they must first try the law and the courts, advising them to sue their enemies for damages. So they accordingly hired 4 lawyers to help them do so. However, when the mob in Jackson County found out about this petition to the governor and the hiring of lawyers to prosecute them, they became enraged and recommenced stoning houses, breaking windows, and the like, small aggressions at first. Then on October 31st, things escalated dramatically, and about 1 week later, the saints found themselves expelled from Jackson County. Parley P. Pratt, an eyewitness, gives a detailed account of how events unfolded. Thursday night, the 31st of October, between 40 and 50, many of whom were armed with guns, unroofed and partly demolished 10 dwelling houses, and in the midst of the shrieks and screams of women and children, whipped and beaten in a savage manner several of the men, and with their horrid threats frightened women and children into the wilderness. Saturday night, November 2nd, a party of the mob made an attack upon a settlement about 6 miles west of town. Here they tore the roof from a dwelling, broke open another house, found the owner, Mr. David Bennett, sick in bed. Him they beat inhumanely and swore they would blow his brains out, and discharging a pistol, the ball cut a deep gash across the top of his head. On Tuesday and Wednesday nights, the 5th and 6th of November, women and children fled in every direction before a merciless mob. One party of about 150 women and children fled to the prairie, where they wandered for several days, mostly without food and nothing but the open firmament for their shelter. Other parties fled toward the Missouri River. Parties of the mob were hunting men, firing upon some, tying up and whipping others. Thursday, November 7th, on the shore of the Missouri River, hundreds of people were seen in every direction, some in tents and some in the open air around their fires, while the rain descended in torrents. Husbands were inquiring for wives and women for their husbands, parents for children and children for parents. Some had had the good fortune to escape with their family, household goods, and some provisions, while others knew not the fate of their friends and had lost all their goods. The scene was indescribable, and I am sure would have melted the hearts of any people upon earth, except our blind oppressors and a prejudiced and ignorant community. In short, every member of the society was driven from the county, and fields of corn were plundered and destroyed, stacks of wheat were burned, household goods plundered, and every kind of property lost, and at length no less than 203 houses burned, according to the estimate of their own people in Jackson. The saints who fled took refuge in the neighboring counties, mostly in Clay County, which received them with some degree of kindness. On November 25th, Joseph Smith learned the details of what happened from eyewitnesses Orson Hyde and John Gould. On December 10th, Joseph received letters from Missouri church leaders Edward Partridge, John Corrill, and William Phelps, written weeks earlier, which supplied more details and sought counsel and direction about what should be done next. Edward, for instance, wrote, "We are in hopes that we shall be able to return to our houses and lands before a great while, but how this is to be accomplished is all in the dark to us as yet. I want your advice upon the subject of the lands, and also I want wisdom and light on many subjects in this time of trial." Joseph responded in a letter that same day, saying, among other things, that I cannot learn from any communication by the Spirit to me that Zion has forfeited her claim to a celestial crown, notwithstanding the Lord has caused her to be thus afflicted. I have always expected, he said, that Zion would suffer sore affliction from what I could learn from the revelations which have been given, such as in these verses here, which Joseph had received over a period of more than 2 years. But I would remind you of a certain clause in one, he said, citing D&C 58:4, which says that after much tribulation cometh the blessing. By this, and also one received of late, I know that Zion in the due time of the Lord will be redeemed, a reference to D&C 100 verse 13. But how many will be the days of her purification, tribulation, and affliction, the Lord has kept hid from my eyes. And when I inquire concerning this subject, the voice of the Lord is, Be still and know that I am God. All those who suffer for my name shall reign with me, and he that layeth down his life for my sake shall find it again. Joseph continues, Now there are 2 things of which I am ignorant, and the Lord will not show me, perhaps for a wise purpose in himself, and they are these. Why God hath suffered so great calamity to come upon Zion, and again by what means he will return her back to her inheritance with songs of everlasting joy upon her head. These 2 things, brethren, are in part kept back, that they are not plainly shown unto me. 6 days later, however, the Lord did reveal to Joseph in what is now Doctrine and Covenants 101 very clear answers to both of these questions. So that's the rather lengthy backstory.